Millions could be dead in China in just the past few months alone, and the party knew it was coming. Welcome to China Uncensored, I'm Chris Chappell. Here's a question no one wanted to ask. Can 1 million Chinese people die and nobody know? It's kind of like wondering if a tree falls in the forest and no one's around to hear it. Does it make a sound? Except no one's around to hear it because 1 million people died. Over the past several months, a wave of COVID swept China, and the Communist Party knew what to do. Stop counting cases, as some models predicted 1 million or more deaths. We have absolutely no idea how many people have died in China since the first COVID outbreak more than 3 years ago, or since the end of Zero COVID this past December, especially since hundreds of millions of elderly Chinese live in the rural countryside where there's really bad medical infrastructure and no data collection. But the Chinese government stopped counting, so nobody died. Hey, maybe if we stop counting, inflation won't seem so bad. My NFTs won't have become worthless, and my cholesterol won't make the doctor yell at me every time I go in for a visit. For a lot of the pandemic, China operated under a strict zero COVID policy. Entire cities were put into lockdown, sometimes for months. People starved because there wasn't enough food. Mass testing became a daily part of life in China. And then suddenly, it all stopped. Late last year, the Communist Party ended zero COVID almost overnight. And the country was totally unprepared. Within 6 weeks, almost 80% of the country was infected. As I said, we don't know how many people died because officials were told to stop counting. But body bags piled up, and crematoriums burned bodies around the clock. I've seen zombie apocalypse movies that had a more successful response than zero COVID. The Chinese Communist Party should have just called their plan Red Dawn of the Dead. Chinese hospitals were so crowded, ambulances were turned away. And everywhere, there was a shortage of basic medical supplies. Why wasn't the Communist Party more prepared? China's pursuit of zero COVID has resulted in a low level of natural immunity among the public, leaving the population vulnerable. Millions of elderly were unvaccinated. Not that Chinese vaccines are that effective anyway. Chinese vaccines are like using a screen door to keep out water from the garden hose. Gonna be some breakthrough cases. So why didn't China have a plan to deal with the end of zero COVID? Well, according to new information just revealed by the Associated Press, China did have a plan, but everything went wrong. I'll tell you more after the break. Welcome back. At least I hope there was an ad there. YouTube is basically trying to run us out of business by cutting off ad revenue, especially for covering crazy conspiracies like the Chinese Communist Party covered up where COVID came from. The only reason China Uncensored exists is because of support from viewers like you. If you want to keep seeing China Uncensored, please help support the show by visiting patreon.com/China Uncensored and contributing even as little as $1 an episode. You can also set a monthly limit if that's too much. And a big thank you to everyone who already contributes. We couldn't expose the CCP without you. So, according to information obtained by the Associated Press, China actually did plan for backing out of Red Dawn of the Dead. Zero COVID. But everything went wrong. A perfect example of all the problems of a communist system. By late 2021, there was already major public pushback to zero COVID. Massive citywide lockdowns in places like Xi'an left people starving in their homes. So Chinese leaders began discussing how to lift restrictions. Now, this is new information. The AP just discovered a report to China's State Council from March 2022. In the 100-page report, top medical experts submitted detailed proposals to prepare for a gradual exit to the State Council, China's cabinet. It included things like proposals to boost China's stalling vaccination campaign, increase ICU bed capacity, stock up on antivirals, and order patients with mild COVID-19 symptoms to stay at home. Wow, that actually sounds sensible. So sensible, I assume they stole the idea from other countries. And then the Communist Party, true to form, made a horrible Chinese knockoff of these plans which broke down immediately. Because March also saw a deadly outbreak of COVID in Hong Kong. Around that time, COVID also began rapidly spreading through Shanghai. Now, initially, the local government responded with a lighter approach, what they called precision controls, which were equally insane, like locking down a single bubble tea shop that's somehow too precise and not precise at all. That's like if you have an infectious skin-eating virus and say, don't worry guys, I covered my toes, you're safe. Turns out Shanghai's precision controls didn't stop the spread. So in typical communist fashion, the government responded by swinging to the other extreme. They put Shanghai into a brutal 2-month lockdown, where yes, people were again starving. People were furious. Actually, they were mildly annoyed since they were too hungry to be furious. And then the Communist Party doubled down on zero COVID. This editorial in state-run People's Daily said, resolutely uphold zero COVID, and quoted Xi Jinping saying, persistence is victory, which effectively meant that any criticism of zero COVID was forbidden. One of the Chinese experts who was censored told the AP anybody who wanted to say something that is different from the official narrative was basically just silenced. They may have run out of medical supplies, but they always had more than enough black bags lying around. Welcome to communism. You see, later that year, in October, there was a major meeting of the Communist Party, the 20th National Party Congress, where it was expected for Xi Jinping to essentially declare himself leader of the Communist Party for life, which he did. So the party wanted to keep a tight grip on society and COVID in the lead up to it. And if there were millions of deaths, that would have reflected badly on Xi Jinping. At the same time, though, growing public resentment and the fact zero COVID was killing China's economy was making it abundantly clear that zero COVID was not sustainable and also not really effective. COVID kept spreading anyway. For example, authorities locked down Zhengzhou, a provincial capital home to over 10 million people, with no public announcement, even though they were reporting only a handful of cases. Or there may have been a lot more than just a handful, but just not in official numbers. As the Congress approached, authorities began hiding cases and resorting to secret lockdowns and quarantines. Straight out of the Communist Party playbook. But even after the 20th Party Congress finished in October and Xi successfully extended his reign, things didn't get better. That's because the party doesn't like to admit mistakes. So the central government began issuing new but weirdly mixed signals. On November 10th last year, Xi told officials to adhere to scientific and precise prevention and control. The next day, there were a bunch of new measures put out that tweaked zero COVID restrictions, but at the same time, Xi was also saying to stick to zero COVID. This would be like playing a red light, green light, and the first thing the person yells out is purple light. So local government officials had no idea what to do. And remember, officials could be demoted or fired or worse if COVID broke out in their areas. So COVID policies changed constantly. For example, the capital of Hebei province was shut down, opened up, and closed again over the span of 9 days. So then Xi Jinping tried to help the situation by calling city officials and instructing them to have measures that were neither too strict nor too soft. Wow, thanks for the clarity. Who did he put in charge of measuring that? Goldilocks? And then the dam burst. At the end of November, massive protests against zero COVID erupted across China. Protesters were even chanting, CCP step down, Xi Jinping step down. This was actually a perfect opportunity for Xi Jinping and the Communist Party. Zero COVID had to end, it wasn't sustainable. But there were no preparations in place for how to do it. But now, protesters could be a convenient scapegoat for anything that went wrong after a sudden zero COVID reversal. Almost overnight, references to zero COVID vanished from government statements. State newswire Xinhua said the pandemic was causing fatigue, anxiety, and tensions, and that the cost of controlling it was increasing day by day. Then, Vice Premier Sun Chunlan, who is known as China's COVID czar, told medical experts the state planned to walk briskly out of zero COVID. By early December, Zero COVID was basically dismantled, with no meaningful attempt to stock medical supplies, prepare hospitals for a surge, or to get more of the elderly vaccinated. And as a result of the Communist Party's screw-up, millions more people could be dead. Although again, we don't know because that data is not being collected. Now this may sound like a catastrophe to you if you live in some kind of liberal democracy that values human life, but if you look at the history of communism, whether you're talking about the Holodomor in Ukraine, Mao's Great Famine, or the killing fields of the Khmer Rouge, communist regimes use widespread death as a tool to solidify their grip on power. Chinese Communist Party leaders may be cruel, but they're not stupid. They knew what would happen if it suddenly backed off Zero COVID. This new reporting from the AP shows top officials were warned and did it anyway. I'm sensing a pattern. Communist regimes are responsible for so many widespread deaths. Even people who want to are having a hard time keeping count. And China Uncensored would not exist without support from viewers like you. If you'd like to contribute, we recently set up a new way to make recurring payments of any amount on PayPal. Link to that is in the description below. But today I'll answer a question from one of our supporters who contributes on our exclusive social media platform, Locals. Today's question comes from Hedgenator. If you were Supreme Advisor to the free world and given the dual mandate of protecting it from the CCP while not triggering a global economic crisis, what would be your top 3 policy recommendations? Interesting question. I guess we're assuming I'd have absolute power. So the first thing I would do is have everyone melt down their gold and make a giant statue of me. Although I guess that is the sort of thing that would cause a global economic crisis. So, assuming I'd have absolute power and the ability to rein in my hubris, I'd make decoupling from China a priority. Bring manufacturing back to the U.S., or at least with countries that aren't trying to destroy us. I'd prevent U.S. companies from investing in Chinese companies that are not so secretly tied to the Chinese Communist Party and Chinese military. And I'd sanction any Chinese company involved with the state, which is basically all of them. We don't do business with companies that work in Iran, nor should we with companies that operate in China. And I'd push the U.S. to invest more in countries that China is trying to influence, particularly the Pacific Island nations. The U.S. left a power vacuum there that the Communist Party was more than happy to step into. Now, obviously, any big policy change would be disruptive to the global economy, but decoupling from China now will help prevent a much bigger catastrophe down the line. So thanks for your question, Hedgenator. It was a beautiful thought experiment. And thank you all for watching. You can support China Uncensored with a small monthly contribution on Locals. You'll be able to have access to a China Uncensored exclusive social media platform where you can talk with other fans and Matt, Shelley, and I, plus ask me your questions. That's ChinaUncensored.locals.com. Link is below. Once again, I'm Chris Chappell. See you next time.